What is up, guys, and welcome to another episode of Guarani Vision, the first ever podcast dedicated to Paraguayan football in English. As always, I'm Roberto Rojas, and joining me are my two great co-hosts, Fede Perez and Ralph Hannah. And guys, we're already in the midway point of January. I feel like this month's gone by so fast, which means probably the year will go by fast, but there's a lot going on right now in Paraguay at the minute. Obviously, we need to talk about what's going on with the Apertura. The league's campaign is going to start very soon, but before that, we have a Super Copa that is to be played between the two big powerhouse, or two of the big powerhouses in the country, with Olimpia taking on Libertad, to kind of get a good first look of how these kind of teams look like, especially with Olimpia with their new players under Martin Palermo. We also have to talk about what the Paraguayans have been doing abroad, some scoring, some performing very well, some whose future might be at risk, and some who are ready to make that big jump. So we got a lot to mention on that, but I gotta go to Fede, man, who, I'm convinced that this man is either not hot at all, or just, the fact that he's right here in a room where he's not sweating or anything like that shows that he's built different. I guess that's the Paraguayan way, that you need to survive this kind of weather in January and February in order to do well. But Fede, I mean, here we are. It's the 17th. We're, a couple days away from the start of the Apertura, and everything going on. How's the mood been like in Paraguay with all these teams? I feel bad for Olimpia though, because I feel like they haven't had that big test. They were supposed to play Independiente, and that game actually got canceled. So it's the preparations haven't been that organized so far for Olimpia so far.
Hi, Roberto. Hi, Rob. Hi to everyone listening to Guarani Vision. Yeah, just as you're mentioning, most teams have actually stayed here in Paraguay to do their preseason. I think Olimpia is the only one that kind of left the country to play those friendlies outside. They went through Argentina, and now they're in Uruguay. They had problems to play against Independiente. That was a fun one that a lot of people were looking ahead. They played last preseason around, and the idea was to play pretty much again and again. That's the idea of Olympia, to try to make this a constant preseason game against another huge champion with much history in Libertadores, just like Olympia. As for everyone else, they're getting ready. They're starting to play friendlies. They're starting to play games. They're starting to loosen up right after the whole preseason here in Paraguay, where it has been really hot, Roberto. I don't know how the teams are doing. I don't know how the guys are doing, especially the new players, right? The ones that have to accumulate themselves into this new weather, get used to it. And obviously that's been part of the preseason. That's going to be part of the first couple of weeks also, because the heat is just going to keep on going probably until March at least. We know that. Everyone that lives here knows that. It's a situation we got to go through. These are the hot days. But talking about hot stuff, let's talk a little bit about our TikTok, Roberto, because this week we threw out there, we have something new for this year to give to our audience, to everyone that follows Guarani Vision. Obviously, you can find us. You can find our TikTok account as Guarani Vision. Thankfully, that name wasn't taken, because you guys know how it is when you try to put a new account out there. It's hard to find the names, but thankfully we got it up there. We got a couple of videos already set up there. I want you guys to comment. I want you guys to follow us. Obviously, we're gonna have a lot of videos. We've been doing short videos since last year on our YouTube channel, and that's been doing actually really well. I saw Roberto's last video hit over 500 views. So I'm really looking forward to everything that we can accomplish this season. Also, as we're starting to kick it off, Roberto, this is just our second episode, and we're gonna talk about predictions for this Apertura. We're going to talk about the Super Copa. The first game of the season is really close.
It is very close. It is very close. And yeah, absolutely. Like Fed had said, you can follow us on TikTok. Here in the United States, we don't know if we can see that much as of yet. We have to wait and see if, the new president will try to change that. So me and Ralph might not have the fortune of looking at that. So Fed, no pressure. Maybe it's on you to do that.
Don't worry about it. I'm going to be taking care of that account most of the year. But yeah, I've been hearing about a couple of rich people that want to buy TikTok. So I wouldn't worry about it, Roberto.
At this point, probably Horacio Cartes. He has all the money in the world. He might do that thing. But yeah, Ralph, like you said, like Fed said, it really is heating up. And also one team that, of course, we haven't mentioned yet is Cerro Porteño, because they did some business as well in kind of the last few days of the transfer, or at least the start of before the start of the season. We saw them getting Alan Soñora, a player that was capped on the U.S. national team, the first ever national team player from the United States to play for Cerro Porteño. He had previous experience at Huracan, Independiente, and in Mexico. We also saw them bring in Matias Perez from Russia. So you have a lot of players from Argentina, or at least like Argentina based already from Diego Martinez who comes in. He's bringing a lot of transfers in. So it's not just Olimpia doing the business right now. It's also Cerro Porteño who, maybe not much has been made of them in terms of like big signings as opposed to like maybe a few, but they know that heading into this Apertura, they can't fail because they've gone so long without winning. They can't fail at this point. It's a long drought for a team like Cerro Porteño who have always been accustomed to contending for titles and wanting to win them. They don't want to go another 6 months without winning anything.
Hey, Roberto. Hey, guys. Hey, Fede. So you're already predicting Cerro for the Apertura. I can
I have
hear it
not. I
in
have
the
not
voice.
said a word. I have only said that there's the pressure on them. So not yet. I haven't said anything yet. I'm still thinking about it, even though we're supposed to predict it today. So just mentioning them. That's all.
The pressure's on all of us as well then. Yeah, I mean, I think it's interesting, right? That what you're seeing from Cerro is the appointment of Huayna as the sporting director, and then definitely Diego Huertas he's from Lanús, who came in as head of recruitment. You can start to see already their like fingerprints over this team, along with Diego Martinez, the head coach. So it's kind of, there seems to be, for the first time in a while with Cerro, a bit of cohesion in terms of the players they're recruiting and who they're looking at. So I guess that does bode well for them as they start to really look to build a team. But time is short. That's I think what we're talking about now, because the preseason in itself is quite short at this time of year. But then we've got, as we're talking about, the Supercopa comes on the 22nd, and then Cerro's first game is on next Sunday, right? So on the 26th. So I mean, there's not enough time for these players to really get to know each other. They're going to have to try and learn it on the pitch in those first few games. And so that's what makes this very exciting, I think, with both Olimpia and Cerro having these big changes in their team. How do they incorporate that? How does it work? And then does that leave you with somebody that's a bit more stable, like a Guarani or even a Libertad, that they start coming back into it? So I think it's very exciting to see what might happen. And there's so many question marks, which we're going to try and go through today, I guess, on this episode. And we've also got to talk about everybody that's playing abroad. There's been some great moments for our Paraguayans in England, and there's still a lot of movement and possible movement happening with players all over the world.
Yeah, we'll definitely mention that when we pass that. But yeah, let's talk about what's going on firstly in the league campaign. Kind of the first big game, Fede, that's going to be happening is the Supercopa de Paraguay. It's going to be against Libertad, against Olimpia at the Defensores del Chaco on the 22nd. So, just a couple days away at the time of recording. And, I feel like for both these two teams, as much I don't know how you guys feel about Super Cubs or anything like that. And, some people like it, some people don't. But I feel like it is a good first test because at least you can see what both teams are trying to do. Obviously, Libertad, they won the Copa Paraguay. They had won the league last year, or the Apertura in this case. They're trying to find another identity in this sense, try to do well and try to compete after they have this long standing form of doing so well. As for Olimpia with Martin Palermo, they also want to kind of return to their glory years of like trying to win titles every time. So you really have a test of the two best teams, at least right now, in the country, and we have to see what happens. But at the end of the day, it is a Super Cup. It's just one game, so it is a title, but I don't know if it's going to have a lasting impression on both these two teams for the entire season.
Yeah, I agree with you. Most people don't remember this title at the end of the year, right? But it is the way to start off the year. And I think it's actually great. It's a great way to start the season with a great football game between Olimpia and Libertad. The rivalry has always been there between these two teams. So we're going to see that in the stands. I've heard that over 15,000 tickets have already been sold, and we're pretty much a week away from the match. So that speaks also about, people wanting to be at a game like this in Defensores del Chaco. Olimpia is not going to have their home ground again during the whole year, so they're going to play a lot again in this Defensores del Chaco. Libertad is going to have their home ground eventually back for this Apertura. I think that's going to be huge for them. But as for this game itself, it is just 90 minutes or penalties, so you have that chemistry going during the whole game of what can actually happen. Just a single player can actually change the whole game, and I'm looking forward to this match mainly because it is the first game of the season. I think players are going to come in fresh. Everybody's going to be 100% ready. And that could actually work out in Libertad's favor, even though it is Olimpia that's coming off from being champions of the Clausura. I think Libertad has a lot of players that are, I wouldn't say old, but they are over 40 years old, or they're close to it, and they need to be fresh. They need to be in competition, but when they're playing every 3 days, it is harder for them. So to have just one game and against Olimpia like it is this way for Roque Santa Cruz, for Tacuara Cardoso, the players that can really make the difference in these kind of games, I'm really looking forward to it, because as of Libertad, they lost a lot of players, but they haven't hired absolutely anything, right? They only had a couple of players coming back from loan. Gilberto Flores, a center back that played pretty much all season regularly for Trinidense these last couple of seasons. And then you have also Adriano Alcaraz, who had a fantastic season last year with Guarani. He was one of my favorite players. I want to see if he gets eventually some playing time with this Libertad, but exciting players to look forward to. Olympia's probably one of the best Olimpia players last season was Gaston Olveira. We talked about him in the first episode also, and it's going to be one of those tasks also for Libertad to see if they can actually score on this goalkeeper that was just unstoppable last season around. I think there's a lot of key matches to look forward into what could happen against Olimpia and Libertad. It is a really hard one to predict, Roberto and Ralph.
Holding off on the prediction again. See, nobody's doing predictions today. But I'm with Fede that I think this game, in some countries, I think Super Copas, or in England, they have the Community Shield. People have maybe become a bit jaded to them after so many years. But this is a new tournament and people enjoy it. I mean, remember the first game was Olimpia Cerro back in 2022, and Jean Fernandez gets sent off before the game even starts. So you had a huge talking point there. Olimpia went on to win. And then the last time that they played this game was in, I think in Encarnacion, when Ameliano took on Olimpia, and Ameliano shocked the world and beat Olimpia to win their Super Copa title, which people weren't expecting. So I think we've so far had, this is only the third edition, because there was none last year because Libertad had won everything. They couldn't play themselves. So this is only the third time it's happened, and I think people are still excited, and always there's a sense, I think, after a long holiday break, that people want to get back to watching football, and I think that's why the tickets are already selling quite well. And then in terms of on the pitch itself, it's going to be hard because we don't really know what team Olimpia are going to field, right? Of these new signings, who comes straight in, who still needs more time. I don't think we know that. We're still a bit far away from starting to see the training sessions and know what kind of 11 we might have. But we're definitely going to get some interesting matchups with especially with this attack of Libertad against the defense of Olimpia, like I think Fede was alluding to, because that's really what Olimpia built their championship winning season on, was defense. You also know that Libertad did the difficult thing of holding out for a 1-0 win in the final of the Copa Paraguay. That was their last game, right? Libertad's last game of the season was winning the Copa Paraguay, which put them here to play the Super Copa. And so you might get a very, I think, kind of edgy, tight game at the beginning as the teams try and see each other out. And I think from both sets of teams, they really want to win this to start the season on the right foot, and then knowing that they're going into a really tough Apertura, because they both have really difficult games afterwards, as I'm sure we're going to talk about. Olimpia are going to have to play Guarani, and Libertad are going to have to play Cerro Porteño. So, I mean, after this game, they then have a big game to kick off their league season. So they've really just got to go in hot and start this as well as they can.
So how do you see this going on? I mean, is there one team that you feel could do it? I mean, I think just based on names itself, I'm actually going to go for Olimpia in this one. I think it's going to be a really tight game because I think both these two teams can really match each other up. But I think Olimpia do it. I think Olimpia do win it. I'll say probably 1-0. Benedetto gets his first official goal for Olimpia in this game. Fede, what do you say?
It is so hard to predict this one, right? Because it is the first game of the season. We have no idea what kind of team Olimpia is going to put, especially on defense, guys. I mean, that's going to be a totally new defense. He's been trying it out. They still got a couple of friendlies to happen. I think Libertad is the one that's actually coming in with a better structure. They didn't let go of that many players. Patito Aquino is a winning coach. He's shown that in his first games in Copa Paraguay. So I'm going to stick with Libertad on this one, even though I did do believe it is going to be a very tight one. Even it might go down to penalties or just win it by just a goal. That's what I think. That's what I believe.
Yeah, I think definitely a close game. You're not going to get something like the 4-0 when Olimpia played Libertad in the Clausura, which was, I think, towards the end of Ariel Galeano's time there. But I think you've got a better team structure from Libertad for sure. They seem to struggle a bit last year deciding what they were going to do, especially defensively, like how they were going to set up. So I think we'll get a tight one. If I had to pick, I think I'll go for Olympia. I think Olympia, when it comes down to big games, they're usually the team that you're going to back and want to go for. So I think Olympia continue this winning run under Palermo and they get another title.
I know Roberto said several times that Rio Benedetto, he's been saying it since the first episode. He's really excited about this player. Particularly, I'm more excited about a player like Ivan Leguizamon, Antonio Barreiro. I think those are the players that are going to be way more important than what goals can come from Dario Benedetto, especially because of the way that Olimpia is going to have to try and play now, Roberto, right? With Derlis Gonzalez and Dario Benedetto being up there. I think a lot of the football is going to come by the sides. They're going to need to be strong on the sides with players making the difference in that sense. That's why I think they brought in so many players of that style of playing.
Yeah, I think Leguizamon is a good point because I feel like he can provide that sort of difference, working in midfield and, trying to connect the attack. So we have to see if Palermo is going to try to connect him with Benedetto as well. Maybe Lucas Prato, if he's still got it as well, can maybe play a big role. But, I think all of us are expecting a really tight game. I think it's certainly, again, like I said, it's not the most important thing to worry about. Like, okay, if they win, they win, and if they lose, sucks, but it's not like the end of the world. So I think for both these two teams, they feel like they can really get off the right foot because I feel like there's a lot going on between them, like trying to get their expectations. They're both also, trying to. They'll be in the Copa Libertadores in a couple of weeks as well, or at least some of them starting them in the group stage. So for them, it kind of gives them that motivation to like do better and try to fix what's going on and try to improve on all ends, especially when the Apertura starts as well. So I'm looking forward to it. I think it's gonna be a really tight game, and I think Ralph and I will say Olimpia, and Fede, you're gonna be the contrarian and saying Libertad's gonna win it. So it's gonna be a really fascinating game over there at the Defensores del Chaco as we switch to what's happening in the Apertura because we finally have the start of the Apertura. It is beginning on the 24th in just exactly a week, with the first two games happening between Sportivo Trinidense and Sportivo Almeliano, and new kids Atlético Timbateru against Sportivo Luqueño. On the 25th, we have Do de Mayo taking on Nacional, General Caballero de Juan León Mallorquín taking on Deportivo Recoleta, another new team. But the big one is on Sunday. That's the one that everyone is kind of really focused on because you have four big teams, probably the big four in this case. If you look at like history and kind of the connection there. Olimpia against Guarani at the Defensores and Cerro Porteño against Libertad at La Nueva Olla. I mean, Ralph, what a way to start the Apertura. You got the four biggest teams in the country facing against each other. And I think for all these teams, they feel like getting on the right foot is very much a vital thing, and more so when it's against these opponents, these kind of direct opponents. Cedro and Libertad, I'm sure they're going to be fighting for the Apertura title, and for Olimpia, I think they know that Guarani can be always really a tricky team to face, but I'm sure they're going to try to mess up the party if they need to.
Yeah, very much a Super Sunday, right? In the old style of the Premier League back in the 2000s. I think the Olimpia Guarani game is interesting because, yeah, Olimpia are going to come off the back of playing the Supercopa that we were just talking about. So they might have to look to rotate some players. And they come up against a Guarani that in a way, they've changed a lot. But then with Chiquiase, sometimes things don't change that much because the style he's going to play, we already know what it's going to be. When you look at the players that he's brought in, some of the new players you have, well, David Fernandez is actually with the under 20, so he won't be there. But then you have Fernando Fernandez, the all-time top goal scorer for the club. He's back playing in Guarani. And then also Willy Mendieta, who was such an important player for Olimpia back in, he's now, 34? So he's still older, but we've seen players of this age can definitely do things in the league. And you kind of know what Mendieta and Fernandez are going to bring. They're going to bring much more creativity and goals, which is maybe what Guarani were missing last year. For sure, they've lost Alcaraz that we talked about, who's gone back to Libertad, but you kind of think with these two, maybe that's the spark they were missing. Because if you remember, Guarani had a really strange season. They finished second, but they tied so many games. I can't remember how many, but it was an incredible amount. And so you think if they just had that little extra, the goals from Fernando Fernandez, maybe could that have been the difference to start getting some wins? So I think that game particularly is really interesting as a very big test for Olimpia coming off what will be the Supercopa. And then similarly, I guess with Libertad, they'll also come off that and they have this big game against, I would say, a very rejuvenated Cerro Porteño, right? Because we're talking about, all these new front office stuff. We're talking about all these new players that have come in, some players really of high quality, people like Matias Perez who's only 25, coming from Russia to play in the Paraguayan league. Someone like Gaston Jimenez, who I know the jury's out on this panel, as we talked about last week, but coming from MLS, Sonora as well, that has had all this experience in a national team player. I mean, there's some big signings coming in, so I think there's a lot of excitement. The question is what we were talking about before: how quickly can they all adapt and get into kind of almost a winning run so quickly? I wouldn't be surprised, by the way, if both of these games end up as draws, just because we're talking about these, all these changing and teams feeling themselves out. And it's such a big game to start the season. Do you really want to drop to give an advantage by losing, right? To give 3 points to what will probably be a rival in the tournament. So you might see a couple of quite edgy games there, but I think it's going to be a great opening for us to start to see what these managers are looking to do with their new players and how these teams will end up faring in the Apertura.
Yeah, no doubt about it. Those are going to be the big games, but just because of the teams they are and because they're aiming for the championship, right? I mean, Guarani has got ready for that. They brought in really good players. I wouldn't say they wasted that much money or they invested that much money into a winning championship team, but they brought experienced players like Fernando Fernandez, who is a guaranteed scorer, especially with that jersey. William Mendieta, who didn't get, I believe, enough game time with Libertad. We'll see if he can get on that streak of playing constantly and being probably that number 10 that Chiqui Arce wants. He didn't find that player last season around. He ended up playing with two huge guys in the box. And I want to see if that ends up happening again, or if we're going to see a midfield that tries to play a bit more, just like Chiqui Arce loves to do, right? He loves to have the ball. He loves for his team to dominate pretty much the games. And Guarani didn't do that last season. That's why they ended up drawing so many games and so many ties, just like Ralph was mentioning. I do believe Guarani is one of the teams to follow because they are one of those teams that have maintained their coach. And that's something really weird to see in the Paraguayan league. I'm looking at Trinidense. They maintained their coach, Arrua, after all the ups and downs they went last season. You have the new teams that are coming also with their coaches that managed them in intermediate and second division. The situation with Tempetaru and Recoleta, there was rumors that Recoleta was going to hire a different coach. They didn't end up doing that. So they're maintaining the project. Also, I don't want to forget about Dos de Mayo, which was probably the big surprise of the 2024 season. Why not talk about them? Nacional also maintained Bernay. So there's a lot of teams actually that maintain their coaches from last season. I think that can be an advantage going into these first games, or that can be a disadvantage, obviously, if you don't get the results right away. It could be the coach, the first one to leave that locker room. I'm really looking forward to what could happen with Olimpia Guarani. I think we're going to see in these first couple of games, Palermo try to maintain that base of players that took him to the success, that took him to the championship in the Clausura. But obviously, in the shadow, in the bench, you have all the new players trying to stand out. They're going to try to look for minutes, and that's where it's going to look really interesting for Olimpia as the games go by and as they get closer to their Libertadores also in a couple of months. As for Cerro Porteño, it's building a brand new team, guys. I want to see really just how accurate Diego Martinez is in that sense, into hitting it right away with the right players, building the right relationships in the pitch and getting the players that can make the difference, right? There's a lot of forwards right now in this team. Ralph talked about that situation. It's just Chico Da Costa, I believe, the only one that has his place guaranteed. The rest of the squad, the offensive side of this team, I still have no idea what Diego Martinez is going to try to do in these first couple of games, and he's got to go right away against Libertad, that if they win the Supercopa, they're going to come in, with their chest up there. They're going to come in hot, and that could even be an advantage for Libertad if they take these first couple of games and they win. They're going to look really good in just a couple of games, and Cerro really needs to pick it up quite right away, guys. I talked about this in the first episode. They're going to be under that pressure, and if they don't win the first 2 or 3 games, it's not going to look pretty at all for the coach.
So I was about to say, go ahead, Ralph. But I think Cerro has to be the team under most pressure out of all the teams out there. Like, Olimpia have the expectation as always, Libertad has as well, but Cerro has to be the team with the most pressure out of all the teams in this to do well.
Yeah, there's a lot of pressure on Cerro as well because of another factor that we talked about before is the stadiums, right? So there's people keeping their coaches, but not many people are able to keep their stadium because we mentioned Olimpia, but Luqueño as well, Guarani as well, are also not using their stadium, all being renovated with this CONMEBOL project and this extra investment. So I was just having a quick look. They've already announced the first 3 fixtures, right? For people that are not familiar with Paraguayan football, we do not know where every game will be played at the beginning of the season, like major European leagues. You usually find out throughout the season and like two games at a time or 2 game weeks at a time. So I'm looking, they're going to use a lot the Luis Salinas, which is in Itagua outside of Asuncion. But interestingly as well, like Guarani are going to play in Carapeguá, their game against General Caballero. So Guarani not having a home ground, they're not even going to be in Asuncion. They're heading out to the countryside to what used to be a very nice stadium. Then it had lots of problems, but I understand they've renovated some of it recently, so it can be used for Primera. So just having a look, and Sol de America Stadium is going to be used as well, which is closer to Asuncion in Villa Lisa. But I'm just having a look. People are going to be all over the country, traveling a lot more. These teams are not so used to it unless you're a Dos de Mayo or General Caballero, that they're from the countryside, so they have to do that. So we're going to see something very interesting there. And like you were saying about Cerro, maybe that heaps the pressure on them too, because they have much more stability of having that home ground. But watch out for Libertad, because Libertad didn't have the home ground last year, but they've done their renovations. So they are back at La Huerta, and that's where traditionally they've been really strong.
Yeah, Libertad is the one that's going to play at Sol America's ground. They played there during their whole campaign of the 2nd division. They did really well, actually playing their home games there as they start the season against Sportivo Luqueño. Like Ralph was mentioning, that's one of the teams that's not going to have a stadium. We'll see eventually what Recoleta does with their situation, because I believe they were getting about 2 or 3 different stadiums ready. They want to play an artificial turf. The new stadiums that are confirmed, just like I mentioned before, are Libertad Stadium that they were working on it last year. It's ready for the competition for this 2025. And I believe the other stadium is Deportivo Ameliano. They're eventually going to try to play in their new stadium also. They're waiting to play at least 1 game so they can start playing against the smaller clubs. So yeah, there are going to be a couple of new stadiums that I believe will be used. I've heard that 12 de Octubre of Itagua is another stadium that they were trying to get ready also for the competition, just because it's really close to Asuncion. It's not that far, especially for Asuncion teams to play their matches, because a lot of the big teams, just like Ralph was mentioning, they're not going to have a stadium ready. As for Cerro Porteño, guys, I see the list of players, and I don't know which is the name that really excites the fans. I don't know if there is a name to really stand out of this list, or if this is just the new coach trying to find new players out there in the market. Obviously, we talked about the experienced players in the first episode, what Gatito can bring to the table, what Velasquez, players that are obviously on the national team right now. I think they're going to be vital, especially in these first games, to try to lead the team. But eventually, you're going to need the new players, these new faces, to show up and to become the stars of this team. And that's where I have my doubts. Is Matias Perez coming to be a starter in this team? Is this forward Alan Soñora going to eventually start in this team? I have my doubts, Jonathan Torres, all these names that we don't know much about here in the Paraguayan scene. Yes, they've been playing in Argentina. Probably the coach knows them better than the Paraguayan audience, but I want to see just how ready they are to play in a big team under the pressure that Cerro's going to have. Fans are not going to wait for them, and they're going to have to take their opportunities right away, guys. And I don't know if there's a name out there that stands out for you guys. Obviously, you guys know Alan Soñora because you've seen him on the national team playing for the U.S. lately. But is there really a name out there that Cerro fans can really get excited about?
But other than the experience, you're talking about other players coming through. What I'd be excited about is seeing after Venezuela, when you get Diego Leon back and you get Aguayo back, if Paraguay have a good tournament, Diego Leon should be confident anyway because he's already signed he's about to sign his big contract for the Premier League. But those kind of players could be really useful to come in and almost like carry the team towards the end of the season, because remember they're quite short seasons, 22 games, so you only need a good run of maybe 10, 11 games to really put yourself in with a chance. So I think those two are the most obvious. I don't know about what I really don't know about is will Paraguay promote many other youth players now that they've made such big changes? Because before it was very obvious because of someone like Fernando Jubero had been at the club on and off for many years, so he knew the players very well. You had people like Gavilan in the reserves who'd been at the club for such a long time, so they knew all the good players that were going to be coming through and would promote them. At the moment now, you might have this almost like this new outlook, so it could be quite a reliance for Diego Martinez to actually say, well, I just want to use the experienced players that I've brought in, that I know who they are and I can trust. But for us, it leaves a lot of question marks because we haven't seen those players and we don't know how they're all going to adapt.
Love that you're touching on that situation, Ralph, because I believe that was a big mistake from the last coach Cerro Porteño had. He relied way too much on the experienced players, and when he had a whole bunch of new young players that were coming up, he didn't use them, especially in Libertadores games.
It's going to be interesting to see how this really plays out, because I think, again, all these players, how is it going to work with a new coach? I feel like that puts them in a really tough spot, honestly. Like again, like you said, they don't really have even a reliant striker, Fede. That's the fear. Like if you're a Cerro Porteño fan, I would be very concerned about the worst. There's always low expectations anyway, especially the way that they've been performing as of late. But I don't know. I feel like even with all these signings, it feels like it's not enough. Maybe it's just me thinking that, but maybe Fede, you can think about, like, speaking to Cerro fans or those that are involved. I just feel like, have they done enough? Is it going to be enough?
Yeah, the new names don't excite me that much, guys. That's what I was telling you. But if I look at the list of players they have, it has to be the season for Francisco da Costa. He has to be the striker. He has to be the top scorer of the league. He needs that kind of season. He has to lead this team in that sense. He played a lot last season. He was able to get accustomed to his new teammates also. I think that's an advantage for this upcoming season. I think we're going to see the best Chico da Costa. He's been getting ready for that. But the big question mark for me is Iturbe ready? Is Cecilio Dominguez ready? Those, I believe, are the players that can carry this team, that can make the difference. Besides the new names, if they're ready for it, if they've had a good preseason, if they're thinking only about football and taking this team to another championship, I think those are players that right now are under the rug, probably because of everything that happened with him the last 6 months under Cerro Porteño. But I believe if they can still come back, I know they have the magic, and I believe that if Cerro Porteño and if this new coach gets them on their toes, they can be those kind of players.
Yeah, I agree that might be the breath of fresh air that maybe they need, or the motivation with this competition for places. But still, when you look at the kind of the whole panorama, I guess, of transfers, you still feel like Olimpia have done the best business. I think we were talking about it last week, but they've really just upped the quality level of a championship winning team. Because Libertad have stayed still, when you start now moving into predictions, which I'm sure we'll be doing, I mean, it's really hard to start looking past Olympia as maintaining this run that they've already done. With the caveat, and this is always a caveat in the Apertura, that teams do focus a lot on the Copa Libertadores. So of course, if the schedule starts getting packed and Copa Libertadores, they have to play right up until the last game to make sure that, the group game, the last group game to make sure they qualify, and they have to be using their best teams, then there's going to be a few league games that suffer. But still, when you look at it, I mean, it really does, everything does seem to be pointing to Olympia, with Cerro challenging for sure, but you don't see them having done enough to overhaul the champions from last year.
Yeah, I mean, it's gonna be a very fascinating tournament, but I do want to mention, like, what team do you feel like can surprise some people before we get into like predictions on who do you think would win? Who do you think can surprise? Because there's a lot. Again, I feel like when it comes to kind of these tournaments, there's always like the new boys, like can Temetaru really surprise some people? Can Recoleta do it as well? I mean, we've seen that in the past of how promoted teams have always made that big jump and kind of surprise people, not really to go and win the title or contend, but they're in that kind of like conversation. I mean, Fede, is there like any teams out there, or even the ones that we've been accustomed to, that you feel like watch out for them? They can definitely do something.
Yeah, I remember last year around this time we were talking about Taquari and their signings. Look how bad it went for them, right? They signed a whole bunch of international players that eventually didn't end up playing that much, or even they never ended up being a good team. And even though they played kind of well in certain points of the season, I'm looking at the list of teams and I'm thinking, can Dos de Mayo do it again? At their home ground, they did so well last season. They've been doing that these last couple of campaigns. I believe they lost very important players, but they brought players to replace them, and they're going to try to probably play the same way again because it was so successful last year around. So I wouldn't be a surprise again because they did it last season, but I do think they're going to be one of the strong teams to look out for. They can take points away from anybody, especially playing at home. And then I'm going to look at Recoleta, guys. This team, if they play on artificial turf, they're going to make it hard for everyone, just like they did in Intermedia in second division. And I saw it week after week. I covered those games, and everybody had problems playing against Recoleta. The way the ball moves, the speed of the game is just totally different. And if Recoleta can get that home advantage again, because they maintain most of their players and they're getting ready for that kind of season, I think those maybe could be the two teams that can surprise. It wouldn't be a surprise if Ameliano has a good tournament again because they've been doing it these last couple of years. So I'm just throwing those three teams out there just to put myself under an umbrella of three teams, guys. I'm not picking just one surprise. I'm picking three, bro.
For me, I mean, it's Dos de Mayo are very interesting, which, yeah, maybe it's not so much of a surprise because they've already done well last year. But what they did, I think they've been very clever. They managed to hold on to Junior Noguera, who was on loan from Cerro. So I think that's important for that stability. And they haven't made huge changes. They brought in like two quite young players. One's really interesting, Amin Molinas from Libertad, because I watched him a couple of times in some videos of reserves. He was wearing the 10 for Libertad. So if you're wearing the 10 for Libertad, you're a good player. He's also, though, he's one of those players that you're not sure if he'll make the leap to senior football. So he's made his debut for Libertad, but I mean, he hasn't played a huge amount of minutes. But that could be just the right formula to keep going what Dos de Mayo did last year. Because if you remember last year, they were doing it very well with those players on loan from places like Olimpia and Cerro, and younger players, mixed with some of that experience. So I think Dos de Mayo for me is interesting. And then just the word on Recoleta, I mean, they really gave Guarani a good game, right? In the friendly. They just played a friendly. It was Guarani's last game at Dos Bocas before it gets renovated. I mean, Recoleta looked very good in that match. Of course, it's only a friendly, no numbers on the back of the shirts. It wasn't taken so seriously, but you kind of get the idea they could compete. And but I think for me that if I had to pick, I'd pick Dos de Mayo, because teams like Luqueño are gonna not have their stadium. Tembetaru, I think they've almost done like a double promotion. It's a really big jump, I think, and a really big leap. And then people like Emiliano and Trinidense are making lots of changes, and that's what we're talking about with Taquari last year. Sometimes that can actually backfire when you have so many changes in personnel to really try and get that team together.
It's gonna be fun. It's gonna be fun. A lot of these surprises. I think I am opting for the Ole Mayo as well. I feel like they've kind of. I felt what we saw from them last year maybe is not a fluke. So I think for them, they can definitely try to surprise some more people as well. I don't think they're gonna go and contend for the title, but I think their performances from last year have kind of like shown like, hey, we can do this as well. Like this time this year as well, not just what we saw last year. So yeah, it's a good shot on that, Ralph. But we look at some of the teams out there that could compete. And yeah, it's going to be a tight one to really predict, but I'll put myself on the spot first. As much as I really want this not to happen, I can't see it being any other team but Olimpia. I think the signings they've made, the kind of formula that they've been able to achieve, but it was really impressed by them in the Clausura. Really was. I think they really did perform very well. They get the wins in the big games. Obviously, the Super Clasico was a big one for them, but I think it's just going to go to the way of Olimpia. I'll say Olimpia first. Cerro Porteño second. I think they'll just, they'll obviously try to compete as much as they can. They'll get very close, but I think it's going to be some of those games where they typically kind of fall off and lose again. And I'll say, yeah, I'll go Libertad third. It's a boring pick. I know it's a top three. That's probably a bit boring and straightforward, but that's how I'm feeling. Fede, what say you? Who wins the 2024 Apertura?
Yeah, there is an obvious team, right, that has spent a lot more money than the rest. That looks like they're not just the champions; they look like even a better team now with the players that they have brought in. So obviously, the obvious pick it is Olympia. I do think they are the number one candidate looking into the season. I want to say Guarani in second place, and I want to say Libertad in third place. I don't know what's going to happen with Cerro Porteño. I don't even want to put him out there because I really have no idea what's going to come of this team. They had a really hard time last season around, and they're building a brand new team. They are obviously always in the fight, but as of right now, I don't see it happening, especially because they brought in players, but they kind of brought them late. There are other teams that are looking better into the competition into these first games. So those are my picks, Roberto. Olympia, Guarani, and Libertad, and in that order, Ralph.
Oh, you took my Guarani as well. I mean, yeah, I'm going for the hat trick. I'd already indicated, right? I think Olympia is definitely on course, or they're the favorites going into this. The fact that they don't have their home stadium is actually the least of their worries, because this is a team that plays so often in Defensores del Chaco. When they're doing well, they sell out that stadium. It's like a home from home. So that's not going to really affect them like it could other sides. And we've just been talking about the quality levels certainly much higher. Then for second place, yeah, the thing about Guarani is they have the best coach, I think, right, in the league. I still think Chiqui Arce, everything he's done in Paraguayan football, he's just such a clever and crafty coach, and he can always get teams to start to churn out results. Last year it just didn't quite click with all the draws, but they still came second. So I think they can repeat that second place. But where I do differ with Fede is I think Cerro will get that third spot over Libertad. I think partly because Libertad have just made no. I mean, they've done nothing to their team, which really was struggling. There's a lot of quality in that team, I know. There's a lot of experience, but they don't seem to have that. They almost seem to be like oh, this team is impossible to beat, and they had that like aura around them. But now you can see that Libertad, I mean, people feel they can beat them. People feel that the untouchables or the inexpendables, I don't know what you call them, like all the older players, they actually are getting old, and so there is a way to find those gaps where you couldn't before. They've lost, and Riveros is of course retired, but they've lost Antonio Bereiro, which was going to be an important player coming back in. Tito Villalba hasn't renovated with them either, right? So I mean, they've lost some important players. They're not bringing anybody in. So that's why I think Cerro will get the third place. So you got Olimpia, Guarani, Cerro.
Feel like we're all in agreement for once. Can you believe it? That's actually a start, which means that it's probably going to go really badly and another team will win it. So, congrats to whoever is going to win that is not named Olympia. Well, obviously, we'll keep an eye on what's going on. It's going to be a really fascinating league, especially with all the Copa Libertadores and Sudamericana tournaments also beginning for both these teams, for all these teams as well. So, keeping an eye on that. And as we switch gears to what's going happening abroad, it was a big weekend actually. The day after we recorded, it was on Saturday where we had the FA Cup. We were all expectant on Brighton perhaps making Diego Gomez's debut. He has not made his debut as of yet, so we are still waiting and seeing what happens. But we did see a very historical moment, Ralph. We saw both Ramon Sosa and Julio Enciso get on the score sheet happening at the same time. Actually, I think kind of within each other, like the difference. I think Enciso, so Julio Enciso was the one that got the goal first. It was his first goal since the famous strike against Man City that put him up for the Puskas Award. He scored the third goal against Norwich City for them to advance to the next round of the FA Cup. Ramon Sosa kind of had a bigger play, a bigger, what's it called? He was more important in the game for Nottingham Forest because he had a goal and an assist in a 2-0 win against Luton Town. He got the assist for Ryan Yates, and then he scored his first goal at the City Ground. So quite a big moment for both these two players. You know, for the first time that two Paraguayans score on the same day in English football, and both these teams on the winning end as well.
Yeah, and really important, I think, for both of them that they took their chance where they did get to go in the starting lineup, especially for Ramon Sosa that hasn't had many starts. I mean, he just had a really good game, and Forest are doing so well in the league. You can't see a reason for Sosa to start starting games because of that team doing so well, but you can tell now he's a really important piece, and he's going to be getting more and more minutes off the bench as the kind of season comes to a close there in Europe. It was interesting, his goal, I thought, because it reminded me kind of the goal he scored when you were there, Roberto. You saw him score his first goal for Forest, that like arriving late in the box, sliding in. He ends on the floor, but he's finished the chance. So I think that was quite interesting. And then the Enciso goal is a classic Julio Enciso goal because he wins the ball back, which he's so good at winning the ball. People forget that because he's so skillful. You just forget how good Enciso is in winning duels, especially high up the pitch. And then it's very classic Enciso because he had at least 2-3 players he should have passed to, but he said, "No, I'm just going to take this on and finish." You can almost see the players like, "What is he doing?" And then the ball hits the net and everybody turns away and celebrates. So it's a very Enciso goal, I thought, but that's really good for him. I mean, he needs it. He needs to add end product to his game because otherwise all the other things he does are great, but they're going to prefer other players that have that end product, so goals, assists. So I mean, I think that was very important for him. Fourth round is usually the end of January, so I'm guessing it's coming up soon.
Out of February, actually. That's the
okay, early February. They keep changing tradition. So early February. And I think Brighton have a really good matchup, right? So I think that will be good to see if he gets game time again. And hopefully Diego Gomez can play because we were hoping to see him in the last Premier League match. He wasn't on the bench again, so we're really hopeful to finally see Gomez get some minutes in England.
Yeah, the people from the social media of Brighton really picked us out, picked out everybody, putting him on the flyer there. We thought that he was going to get his first minutes, but he didn't. So we're still going to be waiting. He has a long journey ahead of him. I know he's getting used to his new club. Hopefully, he will be important in this team eventually. I don't think Julio Enciso is going to be important in this team anytime during this season. And that's the thing, right? You always get the feeling like he's a second, third option for this coach. Like he's not going to rely on him on important matches. He has his team set up, and Enciso has just not convinced him that he can do everything that this coach wants from him for the team, because Enciso is a star. He can make the difference in any play, but he needs to play more as a team player. And I think that's something that has gone against him during most of his career. It happened with the national team at a certain point. And it's happening now, I believe, with this coach in particular. We read, I don't think they have the best relationship, even though I've heard that he was happy that Enciso pressure, that he took the ball away and he finally scored. Obviously, you want one of your best players to be standing out and scoring. That's important for him. I think that kind of brings certain peace to him. He was posting usually lately that he wasn't happy that things weren't coming around for him. So it was really good. It was beautiful to see him score again after so long. For Ramon, I think he has an important role in his team. I think he's important for his coach. That's why every time he comes in, he makes a difference, and he's playing in a winning team. His team is doing really well this season. So I think it's actually even easier for him to come in the pitch and be free, be himself out there. So I'm really happy for Ramon in this first experience that he's having in the Premier League and with this big team. I didn't think Forest were going to have this kind of season, actually.
Yeah, Ralph, just wanted to close on that. I think it's kind of important because, obviously when you're a winning team and, Forest are enjoying this kind of winning form, it's always hard for players that maybe aren't as important, like, in comparison to like a Chris Wood or an Alanga or whatever, for them to have to have someone like Ramon go in and, he obviously performs as much as he can. And I think he's played what, like 15 games so far, and he's got those 2 goals. So it's not like a bad return nevertheless. And that kind of helps that the team's doing well. But I think in comparison with Enciso, I think with them not doing as well, they just got their first win the other day against Ipswich. I think it was their first win in the league in quite some time. So, but they haven't been doing that well in comparison to where they want to be. And I think that's always the difference. It's like, you have one player that obviously maybe isn't playing as much, but is on a winning team. And you have another one that kind of is getting that minutes, but also maybe not performing to the level that he wants. And I think it's gonna be interesting to happen. It's gonna be interesting to see what happens to Julio because there have been talks about him possibly going on loan and him renewing his contract, which would mean him going on loan, but then staying put the next season. It's gonna be weird to see what happens if he even stays put in the next few weeks, which would be kind of really sad to see because Diego Gomez is there as well, which we have to wait and see what happens to him and see when he makes his debut. But it really would suck to have the team that has both Paraguayans, one of them going away just weeks after the second one arrives.
Yeah, I think it's definitely looking at it from that point of view. Those two were together in the Olympics as well, and they played together in Libertad. So it could be a difficult moment for Gomez that finally thinks I'm moving to a team where I know people, because into Miami he went there not really knowing anybody or anything, to have that happen. But the reality is, I mean, Julio Enciso is such a good player, but he's also the kind of personality that he has to be front and center, and he has to be everybody building the team around him. And so I think the current role he's in is just not working for his personality type as well, right? Not just the player he is. And there's plenty of teams out there at a slightly lower level, but still in Europe that would be happy to have someone like him on their team, because he is just such a destructive player when he gets going, when he starts running at people, taking shots. So that's why I think it could happen in reality that he could end up leaving, because there's going to be plenty of clubs interested in him. And just on Ramon, Sosa and Forest doing well, yeah, I think that's really good news. But well, it's obviously good news for him they're doing well, but I think it's really good news that they're playing for something, because as the season wears on and you have to manage minutes and you're really every game counts, then you need the subs and the bench to do more and more work. So I mean, I think that's a really good place for him to be in, rather than if they're in 10th, 11th, and they kind of know we're safe, we're also not making Europe, then they might not need to rely on him as much. But they're actually really going to need Ramon Sosa to play an important role off the bench. And you shouldn't underestimate that, I think, in a league as competitive as the Premier League. Of course, we want to see him start every game and playing 60, 70 minutes. But honestly, I mean, there's a really important role he's going to have. And then next year, that's just going to grow, assuming they get into Europe, because they're going to be in Europe in one of the many competitions there now are. So he's going to have much more game time coming up next season.
Definitely. We'll have to wait and see what happens to both these two players. And, well, of course, Diego Gomez when he makes his debut for Brighton. As we look at some players that are also looking at big moves, either going into England or leaving England, we have to talk about one that obviously has had the experience of playing in England for quite some time, his 6 years over there, but it seems like it's going to come to an end, and that's Miguel Almiron. Miguel Almiron, it's looking likely that he's going to head off to Atlanta United. Fede, it looks like the deal is going to happen, that he goes back to the club where, he made his name. I mean, obviously he had the experience at Cedro and Lanús, but it was his time at Atlanta United that got him that move in the Premier League and made him stay so long. But I don't know. It feels, I mean, certainly he needs to go get playing time anywhere, and certainly I think his talents have proven that he could do it in anywhere that he wants to. But feel a bit disappointed that he didn't want to stay put in Europe anytime. I mean, there were links to Saudi, there were links to other teams in Europe, even in the Premier League. But for him making that jump to MLS, I don't know. I mean, I feel indifferent about it, but at the same time, thinking he's not exactly old. I'm sure he could still keep it up at a high level of playing in Europe. But that's just my opinion.
Yeah, you kind of get the feeling like he's taking a step back, right? Instead of a step forward in his career. When you thought that when he was coming into the European football, he was going to stay there, and we were eventually going to see him maybe in the Italian league, maybe in the Spaniard league, because there were mentions obviously about other teams wanting him, but he's not an easy guy to hire, and he's an expensive player for Newcastle, and they were gonna let him go because they really made a huge investment when they brought him in. So you need a big market like the MLS to come in probably and take him away. There was rumors about Charlotte. We talked about him on we talked about that situation on the last episode. That got kind of cold, and then Atlanta United came in. And they're a team that obviously Almiron is fond of. His family knows the city very well. They lived there for several years. I don't know what the current status of the project of Atlanta United is. I don't know if they're trying to build a winning championship team, if they have leaders in that locker room, or if they need a leader like Almiron was back in the days when he played in that team, because he really was very important in that team. Maybe not off the field that much, but in the pitch, he was the best player in most games, and he was the difference maker. I don't know if they're expecting to get that player again, or they're just expecting to get a role player and a player that can give them some minutes, because as of right now, that's what he's trying to look into. He's trying to be himself again, feel important in the team, because as of right now in Newcastle, he does not have that spot. He's a second role player. He comes in those last minutes. He probably doesn't feel like a professional footballer, to be honest, because he's not playing game to game. He's not getting the opportunity to play 90 minutes. And that's when a player that's playing for his national team is doubting himself, right? That's why he's thinking about the offers. That's why there's rumors about him leaving Newcastle, because he's not playing as much as he would like, obviously.
Yeah, that's right. I think slowly but surely, Newcastle is a team that also, as the season has gone on, they've got much better, and he's been less and less a part. So it's really hard to see how they would bring him back in, especially with the younger players in his position that are doing well at the moment. Although I think Harvey Barnes might be injured, but I don't know. I think you're seeing that slowly they're like almost showing him to the door. It's really interesting, the Atlanta situation, because it's a totally different Atlanta United to when he was there, right? I mean, because obviously they've just brought in a new coach. They got rid of their sporting director a bit before that. I'm trying to think of any of the players were there when he was there. Probably not, from 5-6 years ago. So the only thing he's really signing up for there is a league he knows and a city he knows. And I think the city is the key part, right? Because we've got the feeling this whole time from Miguel Almiron's camp, they do not want to go to Saudi Arabia, which has been spoken about a lot, or the Middle East. They just don't seem interested in heading that way, let's say, like out to that kind of football. So if they're looking for something more closer to Paraguay, something they know, even closer to England in terms of language and culture, maybe the MLS was the natural fit to go back. This is very much from a more personal life side of things, right, than the footballing side. So I think maybe that's where it's come to, and especially I think you're much closer to Paraguay, right? So that's one of the realities. Atlanta to Paraguay is not very far. He's almost setting himself up to then make his kind of retirement. So let's say he does a 3-4 year contract now, and then he not retires, but he goes back to Paraguay to retire. Hey, he's playing on artificial turf in Atlanta, so maybe he's gearing up for Recoleta. You never know, right? He's getting that practice. No, but in all seriousness, I think this seems to be the way he's doing it. And that's always been Miguel Almiron. Remember, guys, right? He's never in the news. He's never at parties. He's just like a quiet family guy. And this makes a lot of sense to me from that side. From the footballing side, I agree. In a way, it's the MLS is just going to be a big drop from the Premier League in terms of standard. There's no other way to look at that. But I think he's also got the confidence that Alfaro is picking players from that league. He's happy to still call people up. He knows they'll be very good physical. He's very good in the athleticism, the physical side, which is what I think he needs for that kind of game he's been playing for Paraguay, right? All of that pressing and tracking back. So there's a few ingredients there that I think make sense to me as why Almiron will go back to Atlanta.
It's going to be interesting to see how his kind of form also helps with the national team, because I think, even when they weren't playing, and I'm talking about him, Enciso, even Ramon, like, as much as they weren't getting those many minutes in England, they were still vital for the national team. So now you put him in a position where he is getting that playing time. He knows the league well. That could help him in the long term, even for the national team, because of course the games are in March. So kind of needs to pick up that form from the get-go. And yeah, who's to say he can't do it again in the league and be an important player? I mean, we have to see what Atlanta United, what their ambitions are, and how they feel as if though they can improve. And if he wants to be that star player, maybe that something that wasn't the case for him maybe when he was there, because he had Joseph Martinez, he had, obviously so many great players on that team. It could change, but it could be a change thing for him, as we go into another player that also just made, well, medically his move to England. It's Diego Leon. He actually had traveled over the weekend to go to England. He went to Carrington to take some medicals, go to Old Trafford, visit some players as well. We see him with some of the South American players like Alejandro Garnacho, Lisandro Martinez, and some of the opponents as well. He had a picture with Kevin De Bruyne, so you're already thinking about maybe his next game. Well, given how Manchester United have been playing it, it's probably likely that he goes into the first team, Ralph. But no, in all seriousness, it's really good to see him getting already adjusted to the way that things are going to be working for him, or we're going to be on his position come the summer when he makes that move to Manchester United, to kind of have that familiarity. Because to me, a big jump from Cerro Porteño, and obviously him playing for the U20 team, see how well he does there. But once that kind of Apertura ends, depending on what Cerro Porteño do, you got one player that's heading off to the Premier League after that.
Yeah, that's right. I think it's really good for that kind of stability for him as well, right? So he's basically secured the with the medical, like he's secured the big contract. He knows now what his future is. That can allow him really to focus on having a big 6 months with Cerro and with the national team first, coming up with the U20s. I think he was actually already back and was on the bench yesterday for Paraguay against Bolivia. He didn't get any minutes, but he's back there already with the Paraguay under-20s as they're getting ready to head to Venezuela for the tournament, which kicks off next week. But now he just, yeah, like I was thinking, he has this like real focus, right? He knows exactly what's going on. It's about taking care of himself, doing what he can on the pitch to help Cerro, and it's interesting because he was a very important player at youth level because of obviously the talent he had, but also that he was a leader. He was one of the captains. And then you come into the senior team, and of course you're not going to be a captain or a leader, but he blew everybody away with what he was doing with scoring those goals. Now he's got the big move. Even though he is only 17, he becomes naturally a key part of the Cerro Porteño team, and almost a leader in terms of saying, well, I know I'm confident in my ability, but everybody else is as well. And so I'm going to be one of these most important parts as we try and push for the Apertura to prove all of us wrong, right? Because none of us picked Cerro Porteño.
You gotta love these stories, Roberto Ralph, right? From rags to riches. I was just reading one of those titles, right? One of those headers from the way that they're just selling the story, right? I mean, this is a very humble kid. As soon as he came back to the airport here in Paraguay after being in Manchester a couple of days, he said, and he was remembering his aunt, his whole family, everyone that kind of chipped in when he didn't have at all money to go and practice for Cerro Porteño, and now he's making his dream come true. He said that it was just like it was like a movie in his head, right? Everything that he lived these last couple of days, and it's just gonna be like that these next couple of months because he's officially a Manchester United player, and we're just so happy to see him move on. I think this is a player that's totally ready for it, and I just want to see how he handles himself during these next couple of months in Cerro Porteño before making that leap to Manchester United, and just how fast can he really arrive to the first team, right? I think that's going to be the big challenge ahead for him, getting ready physically and obviously in football wise. He's got to show that he's ready for it, and he's going to have to Libertadores as a platform also to try to convince Manchester United fans that are going to look at everything he does from now on.
Yeah, absolutely. It's going to be very much a case of him trying to stay healthy, try to obviously learn some English, try to get ready for that big jump, because it's going to be a huge reality check for him. So I'm looking forward to seeing that. And, shout out to the Manchester Evening News for also tagging us on the article. Thank you, Ralph, for that mention. It's really appreciated from them to talk about it. But yeah, I'm looking forward to seeing what happens to Diego Leon as we look forward to this kind of the rest of this big month on Guarani Vision, to close out another great episode for myself, Roberto Rojas, Fede Perez, and Ralph Hannah. Thank you so much for listening in. See you soon.